Welcome to Crashes and Taxes. I am your podcast host for this episode, Rebecca Walser. I am so glad to be back with you guys. I know that it's been a while, and I keep saying, I know that it's been a while and I'm going to get better. It has literally been a phenomenal year for my practice. My practice has grown by leaps and bounds. So my team has pretty much almost doubled within this last year. So that has kept me extremely busy. And for that, I apologize because I do love being with all of my loyal listeners and viewers of Crashes and Taxes. The other thing that has happened is I have a second full-time job because I'm in the Global Executive MBA program with the London School of Economics. It's a program degree. So I will be graduating from the London School of Economics, as well as a second degree from NYU, because for those of you that know, I have my LLM from NYU, and then I will be getting a third actual degree from HEC, out of Paris. It is the world-renowned French business school. So I have been quite busy doing that. I think since I last met with you guys or did a podcast, I've been to both London and Dubai. And I want to specifically talk to you today about what happened in Dubai, because I thought it was probably the most enlightening and the most refreshing circumstance, transparent circumstance that I've ever had with anybody that is Chinese. So let me explain to you what happened. So the program that I'm in, the Global Executive MBA program, it is a truly global program. I think there's less than 9 Americans in the program. So out of a 40-person class, we have less than 25% are Americans. We also have less than 25% that are female, but that's normal. That's the way it's been my life, always in a man's world. So in Dubai, the reason it was in Dubai was we were supposed to be in Shanghai, in actual China. And that obviously, since Corona happened, got kiboshed. And we couldn't be anywhere in China. So our closest opportunity where we could engage in that section of the world, that theater, but still be close was the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and specifically Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And the thing that was really interesting is because it is the Asian section of the program. So we did have a lot of Asian-based speakers. And we were joined by a Chinese vice premier. And as you guys know, I talked on my last podcast specifically about Evergrande, and the Chinese pronounce it Evergrande, just so you will know. They do add the E in English, so they do pronounce it in China as Evergrande. But what happened was we were given a 20-minute presentation from this vice premier. We'll leave him unnamed. We were told not to record anything, not to write down really anything he said. Thought it was a little odd, but he didn't give permission basically to be filmed. And so anytime that happens, I immediately start paying a lot more attention because someone is saying something in a private group setting that they don't necessarily want disseminated to the world. So of course I write it down and I disseminate it through my podcast, but I will leave him nameless. And the point is that what he did and what he said, which I think is a wake-up call to America. If we've never had anyone, if you've never listened to a podcast and had someone say to you, this needs to be a wake-up call, I'm saying that to you right now. Because what this Chinese vice premier did was he came in and he told us about China's ambition and how China sees itself. Very, very bluntly and clearly. And so much so that by the time the conversation was done, I will let you know what I personally and directly asked this Chinese vice premier. So what he said was in his presentation, and specifically to the West. So, you know, China lumps Europe and America as the West, although obviously the US is their largest trading partners. What he said was, we don't want your system, the system of the West. He said, you are bankrupt and we have no intention of following your design because you're bankrupt. And that specific moment, he was talking specifically and directly to the United States. He then said that they have leveraged their new market capabilities since joining the WTO in 2001 to parlay the world into bringing business to China. And they now know, and they are very much aware, that they are now the largest GDP producer in the world. America is the second largest GDP producer now behind China. China is the largest. That's not great. But what's even more frightening, and I'll see if I can find the link to the actual time delayed situation, because there is a presentation for the top 30 GDP producing nations in the world, and it changes as a projection starting from 2000 earlier and going to present day and then projecting out. And what's really sad for America is this projection starts off with China first, because they are now, and America second. But you watch America drop and drop and drop and drop. Nigeria is an up and coming country. They have over 220 million people, and we expect them to be a top 10 GDP producer within the next less than 10 years. So you start to see America severely dropping. Nigeria obviously has mostly an energy-based, oil-based economy, so that would be problematic with the changes that we're moving to green energy. But, you know, based on this chart, you just see America just dropping like a lead balloon. And we remain in the top 10, but we're not even in the top 5 within the next 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. It is absolutely designed by the Chinese. And so basically this vice premier talked about how they do not want to emulate the Western system, that the Western system is bankrupt and deserves to be liquidated, in his own words. And at the end of his presentation, which was very Chinese-centric, how China is going to become much more involved in manufacturing semiconductors and engineering equipment. They are wanting to move from a low-level, low-skilled labor force to be the new epicenter of AI and robotics and everything that is sophisticated manufacturing. So they have a plan to really change over from their current manufacturing base to more sophistication. And that will cause America even more problems. You know, what you can see is that China buying a cobalt, mine over here, buying other precious metal mines in the America. You can see with the chip shortage that we're having, where new phones are being delayed because they can't get the chips. New cars, probably the biggest problem we have right now in our supply chain. And it's causing dealerships to potentially face bankruptcy, liquidation, as they can't get new cars because there's not chips for the computerized cars that we're all driving. So at the end of this presentation, which was very China first, and all you have to do is read their Belt and Road Initiative to understand that they have a global paradigm that revolves around China, with China the center of the world. They now have the largest military in the world. Their military is larger than ours. Their Navy, they have the equivalent. They boasted, not in this presentation, I don't want to confuse it and make you think I'm saying that he said this, no, but China has basically made the equivalent of a Navy like 3 times over the last 5 years. They've replicated our entire naval fleet multiple times in the last 5 years. So we have been sitting on the sidelines fighting wars in all these places, Afghanistan, and yet the Chinese, as a nuclear power and the largest GDP producer, are substantially outperforming us. To be honest, they are simply outperforming us. And it is a combination of 2 factors. It is a combination of the Chinese being absolutely determined with an unrelenting resolve that you don't see, except for in America, probably when the pilgrims came from England and from Europe. Maybe our pilgrims that landed here had that sheer and utter absolute determination. But when these people speak about their home country, they're not saying they hate their country, that their country is bad because of this, is bad because of that. They're saying that their country is superior and will be the best and most superior country in the world. This is written, this is what they believe, this is what they say. So one, China has been very determined and dedicated, and they don't have people that self-hate their own country. They don't allow it because they're communists and they have something called a social credit score. So you start to say things like that and you quickly are disengaged from being able to say anything. It is a communist party, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. But the other point that he made, which was the shocking point, and before I get to that, I'm going to just really quickly digress and just give you the second thing that has caused the rise of China and the demise of America, is the fact that America has caused America's demise. You can't have half your country think your country is horrible, has a terrible history, and is not redeemable. And that's what we're saying when we come out and we say, based on our racist slavery past, which we do have, and no one can take away those awful facts. It was a terrible period of time in the world, and certainly America was affected and had a terrible situation. No one could ever defend those time frames or those years. They're not defensible. So please don't ever hear that Rebecca's saying this is defensible. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is, if you take a country and you have half the country believe that your country is not redeemable because of their terrible past, then how is that country ever going to be able to move forward with pride, with national unity, with what it takes, which is a country strong in and of itself, to be able to fight a country like China that is absolutely strong in and of itself? So the second reason that China has risen to the top is because America has let itself fall to the bottom. We have. And there's just no way I can debate statistics with you all day long, but we have. So this vice premier ended his speech by stating that China has leveraged economic modeling to dominate the GDP and the production of the world. But that is less important now as they shift their focus more towards the government and the military. So basically, in a nutshell, when I raised my hand to ask this vice premier to summarize what he had said, I, as an American female, I raised my hand and I said, what I hear you saying is that China leveraged its unique position as an emerging market in the World Trade Organization for the last 20 years, since it's been a member, to get the supply chains of the world transferred to China, to grow the GDP production of China to be massive. And once everybody and the world has outsourced everything to China and is severely locked into that Chinese economic model, now they intend to, in fact, move away from the capitalistic economic model and more towards reversionary and reverting, and communism and their government means are their most important priority. The economic priority is no longer their most important priority because they have gotten and achieved what they wanted to achieve, which was becoming the #1 GDP producer in the world and controlling the supply chains of the world. So we have gotten ourselves into a big mess in the US. This is one that, you could say President Trump tried to deal with it with his tariff war, but we have enabled the dragon, their sign, if you will, to become this massive economic powerhouse that now, as they change to a more communistic model in all facets of what they do, America's just going to have to take it. And that's a big problem. I want you to understand something. I think I said this last time on the podcast, but I want you to understand something. We don't have transparency from China. I mean, I would go ahead and tell you right now on record that Evergrande is going to be liquidated. They are going to go through bankruptcy. They are going to face liquidation. But you're not hearing that in the mainstream, even though data has come out. There's a German advisor group that basically is filing to put them into bankruptcy because they have missed both their September and their October and their November. They used their grace period and made an interest payment in November. So we're told. But I need you to understand something. China does not allow the information about China out. I mentioned to you on our last podcast that they sued in 2012. They sued Moody's, our rating agency in America, because Moody's did a analysis on their real estate market and how overbought and overvalued it was. And the Hong Kong Securities board basically sued Moody's in 2012, and in Chinese courts, they won. And Moody's had to pay several $1 million as a result of that award. And so what does that tell you? That tells you that the transparency of a communistic country is not the same as the transparency of a capitalistic country. We have to be transparent when we have a company going IPO. We get a prospectus, we get all kinds of substantial disclosures. If something is considered to be a non-trivial substantial matter, it must be disclosed under the law. We get 10Ks to get all performance, to have annual financials. We have transparency disclosure over here. And that's what we're used to. And we just think that our way of doing things is the way the rest of the world has of doing things. And it's not. So I say all this to let you guys know where my market outlook is right now. We are 40+% to the upside of our market high. And I'm specifically talking about the S&P 500 now. We're 40% plus to the upside of our market high since the coronavirus. So we are higher by 40% off of our February 2020 high under President Trump before the virus happened. We're over 100+ % off of our low, but we're 40% off of our high. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what is supporting a 40% S&P 500 rise since February of 2020 when coronavirus shut down the entire globe? And understand this, the entire globe, globally, we printed $25 trillion of currency to stave off or keep at bay a global Great Depression. America alone, $8 trillion, and still printing money because the taper hasn't quite started yet. We're still stimulating $120 billion per month. We're about to start tapering. The tapering was supposed to end in June. It's going to now end in March, so we could get interest rates going up as fast as next spring, because Powell has now basically admitted that the inflation is not transitory and that we cannot just print money indefinitely and put 40% of liquidity into our market, making our market go up 40%, and yet somehow there's no inflationary problem. So he's now admitting that inflation is in fact not transitory and we have to do something about this. But China is desperately holding back the information about Evergrande and even the second largest real estate property group they have in China about to go through liquidation. And I just want to prepare you, because globally, as the information finally does come out, however long that takes, whether it's this month or next month or February, it is going to come out and we can expect major market reverberations. It's interesting, last little point I'll leave with you is basically that we are going to experience some market turmoil. And if you do not have the stomach for it, it's funny because if you ask somebody in the middle of a bull market, how risk averse are they? They'll be like, oh, I'm so aggressive. I want to make the money. Let's go for it. It's really easy to be super aggressive in a bull market. But when you start to see these durations and these fluctuations happen, you have to ask yourself, am I really bullish right now after we have literally had a 401% growth, then Corona, and now we're 40% off the high of that? We have gotten some massive growth since 2009 when we started quantitative easing out of the Great Recession, or the GFC, the global financial crisis. And the US-based crash affected the world. That's why the world calls it the global financial crisis, and we in America call it the Great Recession. It affected the world. And likewise, as China's truth comes out about their real estate, it will also reverberate over here, and you should be prepared for it. I'll leave you with this. I raised my hand and I asked this vice premier directly as a white American female. What I hear you saying is you leveraged capitalism to grow your GDP and make you an important GDP producer, if not the most important GDP producer. And now that everyone is got you and you've got them in your grasp, you're telling us no more capitalism is important. We're now moving more towards communistic and government. And I hear you saying that. Is that what you're saying? And of course, he backtracked. You know, I was actually shocked at how much he quickly tried to make it sound less terrible to Americans. But that's what he said. And so I think you should understand that while they're our largest trading partner, they're also our largest threat, and they certainly are a massive threat to our US markets, because if their economy has been propped up artificially for the last 15 plus years by building, you know, multiple $1 million person ghost cities with the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, and all those things, and yet only 1 out of 5 actual apartments that China has built is occupied in China, then I think we have a big problem coming, and it's going to have a contagion impact, because both BlackRock and Vanguard have substantial equity positions that all investors in America have leveraged in China. So we have some problems ahead, and be prepared, because we usually get this Santa Claus effect at the end of the year, and I don't see that happening this year because we just have too much volatility. When you can just barely scratch the surface of your market and get a 600 or 1,000 point swing to the downside simply because there's a new variant of the COVID, or, you know, because the Federal Reserve Chairman said to the Senate, I mean, literally, he said to the Senate, well, maybe it's time for us to drop transitory, and the market was down 600 points within less than a half an hour. That tells you how surface our upside is, and because of that, we will get a reversion to the mean, and you should be prepared for volatility. And if you're not prepared, if you don't have a long window or horizon, you should probably do yourself a really good favor and reduce your risk by taking some profits and moving to something more conservative, ASAP. So I know I haven't given you guys an update in a while with the podcast, but I definitely wanted to give you some insight into my Dubai trip and where and what China is directly saying. And I think it's important, especially right now, with Evergrande still being withheld from the public knowledge. So I hope you guys are having a great December month, and the time is getting so far away from me. It's just going by so fast this year. But I definitely will be back with you next week, and we are going to definitely stay with you through the new year. So take care, everybody, and until next week, talk to you guys then.